like a phrase that may mean different things to different people, patient-centered research. So I started out by asking the panelists to email 2 sentences that I'm going to read to you. And some of them had a few clauses, but they all did manage to define it in 2 sentences. And I thought that would just be a good way to get started. So Donna said, patient-centered research solves a problem defined by patients with a process that includes patients in all areas of design and execution. David said, patient-centered research both involves the patients in the process in determining what should and shouldn't be done. It also results in an impact that's meaningful to patients. Involvement in the process of research will have a direct impact on their lives. It's not and or, it's both. Corey, patient-centered research is focused on building every aspect of our Count Me In research initiatives with deep and iterative patient feedback at every step. From the initial concept to naming each study, to red marking our consent, to details of our process and workflow, through to how to best communicate findings. Patients have led our efforts and been at the heart and center of our research. And Michelle, to me, patient-centered means taking a step back, trying to think about how a new, perhaps scared or overwhelmed patient needs to be engaged. It means figuring out how new technology and tried processes can combine to warmly welcome someone into a trial in a way that ensures they are informed and comforted. So I think that they actually have a lot of overlap in that it's not a token involvement, it's a consistent through multi-step involvement, and that it is that it's not just input. It's input in a way that involves them throughout and ends up meaningful to them. Not necessarily a cure, but meaningful to them. So I wanted to just sort of start out by talking about some of the successful models you have seen. And I mean, one of the things that struck me reading about some of your work is actually, I think all of us are spending some time thinking about the toxicity of online communication, but social media has really been a tool of engaging patients. So I think, we'll just go, since it's hard to see each other. Just start with Corey, we'll go down the row, and something that's working.
Sure, thanks so much for the question. I'm going to just talk a little bit about Count Me In, which is an initiative out of the Broad to generate large data sets from cancer patients that include patient-reported data, genomics data, whole exome sequencing from tumor, normal, and blood, as well as patient-reported information. And the ability to build every aspect of the project with the patient communities that they're meant to serve has made all the difference in terms of engagement for people to both enroll and then stay enrolled after they've taken the steps to become part of the study. And it's that ongoing engagement where I think we've done things really well.
Michelle.
Yeah, I think, as a company that provides a technology interface for patients that is really oriented around access, I think that, there's a concern that patients are less involved in research when we actually shift the focus from the site and the physician to the patient. What inspires me is the feedback we're receiving from patients around decentralization, around integrating research into the daily lives in their own communities and their own homes. And the response that we have seen directly from patients is very positive, to the degree to which patients are actually reporting that I would not have stayed in this clinical trial if this had not been more convenient and more accessible. I think the next phase of this is actually earlier engagement from patients in the design of the trials and more flexibility for patients specifically around the communities that they're in. So I think that engaging and providing access for patients in rural settings could look very different than for patients who are living in Palo Alto and able to come into Stanford. But I think that the model is showing progress, which is important because we all know this is a very hard problem to solve.
So, having been involved in the establishment of PCORI when people were still asking, if we should involve patients, to then moving to how we engage patients in research. It's been an exciting evolution to be part of. At the Global Liver Institute, we have often worked with researchers and research sponsors, really diagramming out all the potential areas of intersection with patients. And many are surprised and hadn't really thought through that patients or patient advocacy organization leaders could be involved in so many stages of the life cycle, particularly starting so early. So I think that some of the most successful models that we are currently involved in are mostly multifaceted, where as the Global Liver Institute, we have patients who are commenting on individual protocols. We have, moving even further back, groups of patients giving feedback on portfolio development. And then I've been able to be involved with some companies in long-term portfolio planning, sometimes across multiple disease states. And so I think the earlier that patients can become involved, the better the ultimate outcome for both research sponsors and for patients themselves. And it's been exciting to see that movement further up the chain.
David.
Yeah, I would just echo the great comments from my fellow panelists. I think that not only is it the right thing to do to involve patients, because at the end of the day, patients are the ones that we do all this work for in the first place. It's the right thing, but it's actually also the best thing to do for your research. When you can involve patients in the process of deciding what these trials should look like, when you can include them in the process of figuring out what would this mean for their lives, by the time that drug does get to market, you have a product that's helping people in a way that's really meaningful. I personally am a patient myself with a rare disease called Castleman disease. I'll actually be sharing much more about my journey after this panel. But I think that involving patients in the science is so critical, and also, and it's not just, as was said earlier, it's not just sort of saying that we're going to involve patients, but it's truly doing that. And so how do you operationalize patient engagement? And one way that we do it is through a crowdsourcing effort. We call it the all-in movement, where we actually invite patients to contribute research questions and research ideas that if we answered with research, we could actually have a meaningful impact for them. And so I think it's these sorts of initiatives where it's not just saying we want patients at the table, but it's actually bringing them to the table and giving them the tools so they can contribute.
So how, there are two related couple of questions. There's a certain type of person who's more engaged and more online and more willing to put themselves out there. So historically, our clinical trials have not been as representative of our country and both gender, race, everything. There's been a lot of, it's been on the law since the 1990s. It's still not where it needs to be. I recently was allowed to listen to a really interesting Zoom with oncologists and Black pastors in Richmond. And one of the things they were talking about was connecting their communities and many trust and other obstacles. So let's talk partly about that diversity issue, and then the second question, just you might want to answer it both. I'll tell you where we're going, but I think there are probably two conversations. Also, dementia and cognitive decline, how do you, these are issues that are going to be ever, day to day more burdensome for our society. We're aging, we're living longer, but we get sick. So let's start with just the diversity, both in terms of racial and sort of economic, but also there's sort of a personality getting all kinds of people in. Broad has done a lot, so do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. It is maybe one of the most important questions I think that we could all address as a community of data generators, aggregators, people who are interested in data more broadly. We cannot live in a world where the vast majority of our data are from white men. We just can't do it anymore. And I think we have to both acknowledge it and understand where we're falling short and how we're falling short and be transparent and honest about it. When we started Count Me In, this is largely a social media driven platform, and I was the face of the initiative. And so a lot of people that signed up looked like me. And so they were middle-aged white women. And we knew that was going to be an issue from the start. And so I was very intentional about trying to bring other people into the fold. And so we had assembled a group of incredible African-American stage 4 metastatic breast cancer patients who told me from day one, they said, so many things that we needed to do that we were not doing. The first thing they said was stop talking and listen. And I think that a lot of people have a tendency to talk a lot about what they think the problems are, rather than just not talking and listening to what people are offering. So that was kind of the first lesson for me, and then several other lessons that led us to build out a team, a representative team throughout the entire organization, not just tokenism, not just something where we could point to one person on the team or even a couple people on the team and say we made good on a promise, but diversifying the group of people that we are hoping will then encourage other people to be part of the initiative. And I'll say we are not there. We have a lot of work to do, but I think that it really requires like a shift in the thought process across the entire institution and organization if you're trying to make good on the delivery of a diverse set of patients and data that ensues.
Yeah, I completely agree with Corey. I think that there's really two incredibly important aspects, which are listen and also the transparency around what's working and what's not working, because we have to ask ourselves, is this something where we're trying to check a box, or are we making meaningful progress? And what we have certainly found is that, I think similar to what Corey's saying and also what Joanne mentioned, it's around engaging people in a conversation, being active listeners around what are the real barriers and what are the ideas that are coming directly from the patients, the individuals who are impacted by this condition and living with these diseases who are underrepresented in the research. And I think that it's easy to assume certain solutions will work, but are we really engaging the communities? Are we really engaging the participants and the people who are living with these conditions to tell us what would be some advantageous approaches, or what are the barriers that they actively see? And I think that's actually the first frontier. It's not that different than primary science. We're not going into it with a set of assumptions that we're trying to validate. We're going in with an open mind and an exploration that will reveal more of the answers and more of the future direction. And I think that, I don't see that happening enough.
I want to address the personality aspect of this first
before
we get into. Well, I think that's because that's how we've set up research.
Right.
If we are thinking more about creating a culture of participation in research that's more holistic, that is doable in the course of how people live their lives, then many more people and many more different types of people can see themselves as the type of person for whom research is a part of their lives. So I think we need to sort of uncouple that, and it's incredibly arrogant to think that on top of being sick, maybe having a child sick, having to hold down a job and do other things for other people in your circle, that now you're supposed to take time out and do all of these things for research. It's just incredibly arrogant, and it needs to stop. Only if we want it to be successful. Otherwise we can keep doing it this way. And so on the racial, ethnic, or gender, or other things, I really think that why would we expect people to be, enter healthcare facilities that make it hard to get to, or are disrespectful to them when they come for the care that they need, and they're supposed to come some extra times to be, disrespected. So why should they trust us as researchers? Why, given our history, should we trust that the research is going to benefit them and their communities long term? Why should they think that we have designed trials and research in ways that respect their time, respect the dollars that they have been lost, just respect them as more than participants? And so until we really rethink the entire process of research and make it about people, and people we want to participate and look at their lives and make it easy for them, we won't have diverse trials.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, I completely agree with each of the comments, is that I think there's the old adage, the first step is admitting that you have a problem, right? And so I think that what we've said on this panel is that I think that we're admitting that we have a problem in this realm within medicine, and then the next step is to take action, the things that have already been said. But I think that collectively in this room, I think we can all recognize that we've got a problem, and then now let's move into action mode.
I wanted to get all of you in on some of those questions, but let's do a quick one on dementia, and I'm going to sort of target it because we have things to get through. And also, just listening and thinking as you talked, I realized there's a whole nother gulf of people who may be reluctant to engage, is that the pandemic has also exacerbated distrust of science and expertise in medicine. And I wonder how you engage Southern rural high school educated white men, who are very, sort of the height of the distrust. So there's another kind of equity issue that we may not have had a few years ago that we might have going forth. But let's do a quick thoughts on dementia and cognitive impairment, and then we'll get a little more targeted. Start at this end this time.
Can you rephrase the question?
How do you engage patients who are cognitively impaired, and yet these are among the biggest disease burdens we're facing?
This is a great question, and I'm not going to be able to answer it in a minute. But I will say that I think that involving the loved ones is really important. We oftentimes talk about patient-centered care, which I could not agree with more. But we can't forget that circled around that patient is a family, friends, loved ones, people that are on that journey with them. And so, of course, when you think about something like dementia, you can't forget about that circle around them of the people that are going through it with them.
They're also they're the ones who have also the burdens that Donna was
Lots of
talking
burdens,
about. Being
absolutely.
a family caregiver is tough, especially if you're working or have kids.
I'm going to also say that white men deserve respect too. I'm just going to stand on that statement.
But you understand what I'm getting at. It's a new chasm.
But quick story, really quick story. Attending an event in Texas and walked into the hotel store. Manager was like, I see you all wearing masks and things. He's like, do you all know something that I don't know? And I was like, yeah, we do. And I was just saying, we get data. Everybody here is getting like real life data and stuff like that. I'm on the board of a hospital. I get these briefings. And I was searching through. I was like, ooh, those bathing suits are way too revealing. I'm like, are there some over? He's like, there are some over there that are better. And I was like, I noticed read a Bible in 1 year behind your back. I'm like, I did that when I was 20. It was fantastic. And so I made a connection with him. And then he's like, masks are sort of uncomfortable. I'm like, well, they have more different types. I'm like, you might want like one that, and before I left, he went in the back, got that mask, and was wearing it. And so I think respect works for everyone, meeting people where they are, connecting with them. And so even though you think I might not be the right messenger to send into Texas to talk to, but we connected on something we had in common, and we need to do more of that as we tailor clinical research conversations.
Do either of you want to weigh in on the dementia, or we?
Sure. I think even when you look at vaccine hesitancy, the healthcare infrastructure and healthcare providers were just like, this makes no sense, this is stupid. But instead of us actually acknowledging what are the concerns, what are the fears, and I can tell you, as a physician, when a patient walks into the room, it's not about criticism. It's about exactly, what we're talking about, which is, I think what Donna referred to, which is it's about respect. It's about understanding what the barrier is and understanding how to connect with a person, primarily so you generate trust. And I do think on an individual basis, we're much better at this, but then when you look at the healthcare system globally, this is really lost in the way we address problems. But coming to dementia, what excites me about the conversation we're having around this summit is one of the primary problems in really addressing dementia from a therapeutic development perspective is it's hard to identify patients early enough to engage them in research so that we can begin to look for interventions that are not so far down the path. We can really develop early, more preventative, or in the earliest stages of mild cognitive impairment. And really that comes from the medical record data. That comes from early signals that we could actually generate and get from data. But then the next phase of that is, okay, so maybe we're getting better at identifying patients through some of the advancements in technology, But then it is, how do we engage patients? And I think the caregiver is a very, very important aspect of this. Our company partnered with the National Cancer Institute, and my colleague, Ingrid Oakley-Gervon and Reem Yunus, led research for 3 years looking at the role of caregivers in clinical research. And what we find is that the caregiver, and it's a benefit, of course, an advantage for a patient who has a caregiver, so let's not assume everyone does, is an incredibly important part of this equation, and it's an underserved part of our solutions when we think about how we're really going to address things in elderly populations, in patients who have dementia, mild cognitive impairment. So I think, one, data makes me optimistic that we'll be able to identify patients earlier, but we need real solutions around the caregivers so that we can engage patients, because they become a critical part of the success of enabling patients and people who have disabilities to engage in clinical research.
I love what the panel has said already. It's spot on with my own experiences, and I want to actually give a very tacit example of what could happen when you engage loved ones in the process of clinical research. I am surviving an exceedingly rare cancer called angiosarcoma, and a lot of the work that I've done has stemmed from my experiences as a biomedical scientist, and with one hat on, and an advocate and patient with my other hats on. And they are inseparable to a lot of the people that I do peer-to-peer advocacy with. And when I get involved with a patient, it's never just the patient when it's a rare cancer. It is always their loved one, their mother, their children, their friends, people that come to support them because it's just too hard for them to do all of this stuff all by themselves. And to your point, many of the people I'm with are lucky enough to have folks that will come to bat for them. And I don't want that is a very important statement that we can't let go. But what happened over time was people were absolutely devastated when that loved one died. They couldn't let the relationship go. And so they continued to be in my life, and they didn't know what to do because all of their energy was just, they didn't have anywhere to put it. And so they would literally email me the entire printed medical record from their loved one and say, please do something with this, please. Whatever you can do, do it. And it led me to build a portal in some of our projects for loved ones. The loved ones could sign up and talk about the experiences that somebody that they knew, friend, relative, whatever, had with their experiences with cancer, and fill out surveys. And we made original discoveries, and just from this one survey, found a way that this disease would spread metastatically that was never published on. And lo and behold, there was a paper out not too long after we just looked at our data, and it was a multi-institutional 10-year retrospective analysis that showed this same trend. All of that work and all of that data collected when you could literally just ask one survey question developed for loved ones. So.
Let's do some more targeted questions. Donna, what's the role of patient advocacy groups in these organized groups in promoting this?
Well, the role that the Global Liver Institute has taken on is really equipping advocates to be able to participate in all of these areas that we've outlined. And so this weekend, in fact, we'll have our Advanced Advocacy Academy, and there are multiple components of it, learning the basics of research, but two new workshops that we've added this year. One is on digital health ambassadors, so literally helping seniors or others being able to sign on, to create an email, sign on to an app, sign into your patient portal, really to be able to participate in that. You need help, so people trained to go into the communities. And then our clinical trial research ambassadors to be able to be that bridge between the researchers in their communities and churches and patient organizations and others in their locale, so that there are constant communications and feedback loops that can hopefully enroll trials faster, but retain patients in there and have more of a sustainable culture of research locally. So I think the role of patient advocacy in really seeding the ecosystem with trained advocates who really can help with that sort of last mile of embedding research is important.
Corey, there's sometimes sort of suspicion or less weight given to patient-reported data, that it's not validated, it's not as reliable. How do you, maybe not by researchers who've come to this panel, but how do you counter that?
It's a great question, and I'm going to put this out to the data generators here. What methods do we use to collect data directly from patients? We have tools that are validated, but I would ask, how much iteration with patients was taken into account when those questions were asked? I think in my experiences, and I'm just going to say one anecdote here to kind of highlight what happens if you don't deeply involve patients when you're trying to generate data directly from them. In our metastatic prostate cancer project, I was working with an oncologist, Ellie Van Allen, and he and I thought we had it done. We wrote the list of questions. They were very simple questions. Where is your cancer located? Where has it spread? All of these things. And we had a couple people A/B test these questions. 3 of the men in our first group said that their cancer was located in Boston. And had we just deployed this survey, we would have had low fidelity data. And so we took the tack that instead of us asking the questions, we would say the type of information we're interested in, give it to the patient so they could word it, and then deploy it. And when we did it that way, we would always get questions we knew they could answer in the method that would produce the best data.
David, there's pressure to do things faster. The pandemic, monkeypox, we may have to deal with polio all over again. I never thought I'd have to write about that in America, but that's what my next 2 days are going to be like. But does speeding it up mean it's hard? Is it going to make it harder to bring in patients because it is a time-consuming effort? It's not you just push a button and you have your patient-centered people. So is there a tension there? And if so, how do you overcome it?
There's a theoretical tension, but my experience has been that actually the group of stakeholders in the whole ecosystem that are the most about speed and urgency and pushing it forward are actually the patients. So, if it's a token involvement of patients, it's going to slow it down. But if it's because you want patients not just at the table, but with the tools, but maybe even leading the discussion at the table, then I think it's going to speed it up. And I can tell you, with the work that we do for Castleman disease, we always have patients in the room, and it's the patients who are pushing the scientists to push things forward more quickly. So it's the patients who are actually speeding things up, and I think we just need to get our minds around that, that if it's not just we want to have a patient here to have a patient, but if we really want to engage them, then I think it actually will speed things up.
Not for you who all engage in this work, but I mean, a few years ago, this was sort of a token issue or a side issue. It's very central now. I mean, it's having its moment. Where are we going to be in 5 years? We only have 2 minutes left, so you're going to have to, without writing it down in advance. David, what do you see if we come back here in 5 years? What will be the most salient change?
I think that it'll be less about patients at the table, which I think patients are now at the table, and it'll be that patients are often leading the discussions at the table, and the tables where the patient is doing that are the ones that are going to be the most successful.
I agree. We're building our own tables, so hopefully it'll just be called research.
Yeah, I think in 5 years, patients need to be really the epicenter of research, not clinical sites. And I think that means that research is a part of our daily lives, and it's something that's quite easy and available for everybody.
I would say there's 2 things that I'm going to put out there as like hopes and dreams. One is that there's going to be a way for patients to navigate the immense amount of information and data that is thrown their way, and to meet them where they are. To a lot of the points that we've made in terms of health equity, there's a lot of questions that people have on the daily with respect to how do they interpret the reports. And when more data is thrown on top of that, it's incumbent upon us as a society to help them understand it. So digital navigators of all of the information that we're putting out there. And then the other is to make room and space for new data streams. There's constantly new innovation. There's also the untapped information that patients hold and that loved ones hold. And we need to be thinking how we stitch it together rather than just creating a system where we talked about largely today, where we're kind of stitching together the interoperability between the data sets that exist. But let's think about what could and should exist to really broaden out how we're thinking about healthcare data.
Thank you for mentioning interoperability, because otherwise, I don't think you're allowed to have a data conversation right now.
It was a drinking game. I actually wanted to say the word at least once while on stage. So.
I just wanted to conclude with some numbers I pulled off of Michelle's of the website for Medable. Because as much progress as you're reporting and as much excitement as you're generating, according to your website, we have a long way to go, which is that only 4% of patients participate. 30% drop out, maybe because of the issues Donna was raising about how life is hard, and 80% of their studies miss their enrollment deadlines. So there's clearly, you're the engaged doing it people, but there's a world out there that hasn't yet
We
connected.
definitely haven't solved the problem for patients, or the numbers would be better. And I think that's really what it comes down to.
We're out of time. Thank you all for attending. I learned a lot. I hope you did too.